We are in the middle of desert in Xinjiang. This is one of the canyon, which is a 5A scenic spot in China, which is considered one of the top scenic spots. We're in a canyon. It's what's called the curse formation.
Sorry, it's just bouncing around because
Yeah,
we're on
a rough road, on a dirt road.
I interrupted.
So this is we're going inside a big canyon. We're just halfway between Kucha and Aksu in Xinjiang.
I can't switch my camera, so I'll just quickly stop and record a second clip. There we go, let's do that. Yeah, so look at that.
And it's about to rain, that's why the sky is darkened.
And it's not very hot.
It's not. It's actually after the clouds moved in, the temperature dropped quite a bit.
Oh, but this is the kind of terrain that reminds me of back home. I like this.
South Africa.
Yes, I like this.
This actually reminds me of American West.
Carl?
Yes.
This is a great moment.
Yes.
We are on the far-flung western side
corner of China.
And we have found something very, very important.
Yes.
It is a burger place. And we are going to buy a burger for the road trip.
Yes. Yes.
September 18th is the anti-Japanese war victory, 80 years.
Is that what this is?
No.
Not that.
But Japanese is the alliance of the
Okay.
fascists.
I follow. It's a steamed egg. So what do you do with it? So you just drink it. Nobody cares if you just. It's a private conversation. It's just like this. It's a private conversation. Nobody cares. They are worried that American internet platform will be used for will be weaponized for sabotage. This is how you get a reality TV show host as the president of the United States.
We're in Shanghai. Is this Eminem playing?
That's Eminem playing.
We're listening to Eminem.
Yeah.
In Shanghai.
Yeah.
Feeds into what you were saying earlier about the censorship not necessarily being about trying to stop Western influence.
Exactly.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, whether you're joining us on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Ganjing World. Today's episode is going to be fascinating because we are stepping away from theory and analysis and diving straight into first-hand experience. My guest tonight is Jerm Warfare, a podcaster and cartoonist from South Africa who recently spent 1 month traveling through China to see for himself what life is really like behind the headlines, beyond the filtered lens of Western media narratives. During his trip, he visited major cities, spoke with locals, and documented his impressions in a 3-part series published on germwarfare.social. He asked the big questions many of us have. What is the reality of China's so-called social credit system? How pervasive is mass surveillance in everyday life in China? And most importantly, is the West telling us the truth about China or a political fiction? Tonight, we will unpack those questions, explore what he saw, and ask what this means for the broader geopolitical contest between East and West. Jerm, my friend, welcome to Syriana Analysis again. It's great to have you on the program.
Kevork, it's always great to chat to you. Thank you for the invitation.
I will not repeat the same thing over and over again, but every time you come to the show, I already feel relaxed with your radio-ish, podcast-ish voice. So I'm sure it's going to be fascinating because 1 month is a lot of time you spend in China. And myself, I would love to visit China. This is one of my in the bucket list actually, and to do probably a road trip as well there. That would be very interesting.
That's exactly what I did, a road trip.
I was playing one of your videos in the desert as an introductory video, and it looked like some of the places in the United States and even in South Africa actually.
Yes. Look, I wasn't there for a month, just short of a month, but I mean, it felt like way longer because I really didn't want to be away from my wife and child for that long. I really struggled. He just recently turned 1 and he started walking.
Wow.
And
God bless him.
Yeah, when I left the house, he was at the front door and I was swallowing lumps. I did not want to go to the airport. So for me, I actually just couldn't wait to get back. It's amazing what family does, man.
Your last post.
Yeah.
I saw your last post when you were leaving China. Finally, I'm going back to see my family. But if you take a step back, you said you went to China to see what the truth is. This is the question that I really wanted to know at the beginning. What pushed you to make that decision, and what kind of narratives or assumptions did you want to test for yourself? Do you have an agenda before going there?
Yeah, I mean, look, there were a couple of variables. So I was given the opportunity. There was some private funding. There was a documentary, a type of documentary being made, and because I work with UK Column, there was an opportunity for me to go on behalf of UK Column to record some of my own experiences there. So there was a series of just great opportunities that all came together, and so I went, and I went with no itinerary that was given to me. So in other words, because people think, you were funded by the Chinese government. No, I wasn't. I went to deliberately debunk Western myths. No, I didn't, because I can tell you right now, there are some claims that are true. I went with as much as an objective, lens as possible. And I want to point out also, Kevork, that it is true that you cannot get, you will never get a full picture from a few weeks in a country, maybe not even in a few years. I mean, China is extremely big. It's technically got, I think, 3 or 4 time zones, but they only have one time zone, but it crosses multiple time zones. But you can certainly get a picture, and getting a picture is better than getting no picture. Yeah. So I would recommend people visit, even if it's for 10 days, go to these places and see for yourself, and talk to the people and do a little bit of less touristy things, which is exactly what I did. I didn't have any touristy itinerary. I rode bicycles in Shanghai. I had to install we can chat about all this. I had to install Alipay and WeChat. Using cash there is virtually impossible. Everything goes via your cell phone. Everything. And there is excessive surveillance, huge amount of cameras. I think in Shanghai, maybe around 15 million cameras, I believe, which is an average of 1 camera for every 2 people. Then I traveled to about 9 cities. I went to Xinjiang province, and that province itself is really, really big and extremely politically sensitive. Anybody who knows anything about the Belt and Road Initiative will know that Xinjiang has been a target for MI6 particularly, and NATO and Western Intel, and so therefore it's a highly militarized province. Lots of issues with Afghanistan, for example, because that's on the border. That border post, I believe, is closed at the moment because they had some insurgencies, and of course there's also wonderful stuff that I noticed in China also from culture. This is also very important. Culture is a big thing, not just geopolitics, but culture was a beautiful thing to see. There are things that I wish that they could export to my country. I really do. But there are many things I really hope will never be exported to my country.
Yes.
And I think the easiest way to explain China is like this. It's a complex system. It's nuanced. It's not binary. Anybody who makes a claim that's 1 or 0 is going to get this very wrong. There's a lot of gray going on. It's a huge country. 1.5 billion people. You can't call it communist because that's one word to define an entire country. These words are meaningless, Kevork. I don't know why there's this obsession in the West to attach labels to everything. I don't know if it's a form of projection. I don't know. It's a communist party or communist whatever. Yeah, sure. But North Korea has got the word democratic in its full title, but North Korea is not really democratic. It doesn't matter what these words are. What matters is reality. And here you have half of the world manufacturing, maybe even more than half, happening in China. People like to talk about Tesla being American. Well, 50% of Tesla is built in China. Majority of Apple is built in Shanghai. You're talking about a highly capitalist society. You've got a very authoritarian government that certainly has centralized control of various sectors, but then it has very little control of other sectors. I mean, this is why the economy is so powerful. And then of course you have the sort of prevailing talking points like digital ID and we can talk about those two, digital ID and social credit. That is the big one. Social credit score, that is suddenly the zeitgeist. Everyone's talking about China and social credit. That is something I specifically looked for. I found very little evidence of it. But we also need to define what what these terms mean. But
What does it mean in the West, and what does it mean in China? Like, the social credit system is so normalized nowadays as a fact that it exists in China, and there are videos in the Western press claiming that this is the technological infrastructure has already been established in China, and some of the people are getting punished, for example, not being able to buy a ticket to travel through provinces because
no, it's nonsense. Most of what you're seeing on X at the moment is it's not organic, Kevork. It's artificially created, and it's backed definitely by Western intel for sure. Same as the Wuhan stuff. Remember back in 2020, suddenly these people were just falling dead on the street. That wasn't Chinese. That was Western propaganda. That was using China as a projection, for its own fears or whatever. But social credit is not something that's new. Now let me just say for the record, I'm not a fan of where things are going. I don't like this idea of people being what's the word? Having a score given to their social behavior, and then you lose the ability to do certain things. All right, I just want to make that clear. I don't like that. But social credit scoring is not new. When I was in Australia in the early 2000s, we were driving, and my friend said to me, we have a demerit system that if you break the road rules so many times in 1 year, you lose a certain amount of points, and then you lose your license for 6 months or something. That is a social credit score because it's rating your behavior on the road.
Yes.
I don't have too much opposition to that, because I'm being from Africa. I know that people drive pretty badly, and being in a car accident is not desirable. Having said that, the Chinese drive really, really badly. And so if they had some type of social credit, it certainly doesn't apply to driving. I saw jaywalking everywhere. I jaywalked everywhere. And another aspect of social credit is probably even where you are, Kevork. If you've got a criminal record, you're going to struggle to get a bank loan.
Yes.
That's social credit scoring.
Nowadays, if you have the wrong opinion, you could lose your bank account.
Yes. And that's not just China. So yes, China does have social credit scoring, but it has it in the same way as many other countries. But this sort of like sci-fi Hollywood perception that is created on social media, that's not true. That's not correct. I didn't see that at all anyway. I saw people riding motorbikes without a helmet. That's illegal. But this is in Shanghai.
Yeah,
they didn't seem to care at all. And so this the behavior that I saw is very similar to everywhere else. And also, yes, something interesting. I told you that Shanghai's got about 15 million cameras. Now, I don't know how many cameras London has, but I think it's close. And London has a large amount of crime, whereas Shanghai's got almost no crime.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if Shanghai's low crime is attributed to those cameras. I don't even know how many of those cameras actually work. If it's just there as a precautionary mechanism, to trick you. I don't know the answer, but what I do know is that you have a lot of cameras in London, you have a lot of crime in London, and suddenly that surveillance becomes very apparent. But when you're in Shanghai, that surveillance is apparent, but it doesn't seem to bother you, because we left a cell phone in a restaurant and went back to fetch it 2 hours later, and it was sitting in exactly the same place. Nobody touched it.
So there is a safety element that comes with this surveillance. I'm remembering because I was in Italy a few weeks ago, and it was hilarious to me to see on the highways the number of these cameras on the highway. It's endless. Every 2 kilometers you have like 50 cameras looking into the highway. And I asked, why is it that way, and it turned out that the Italians on the highway are not the best in driving cars, and the number of the accidents were too high because they were not following the collectively, let's say. So a social credit system has been applied on the entire society there. So a big chunk of cameras were installed. But myself, I'm still just talking about myself. Seeing these cameras is also attributed in my subconscious to this big brother watching everywhere, right? Like whatever you do, whatever you say, or whatever step you take, somebody is watching you, somebody is tracking your face. So this comes with the pros and comes with cons. Like you're no longer free, let's say, and there are limits set for your freedom. I think this is one of the concepts that many Americans, especially in the United States, say that we're a free country. We don't want to be surveilled. We don't want to be our freedoms to be limited. But to be honest with you, Americans are surveilled heavily on all social media platforms. The data is sucked on minute level, right? And this is also weaponized against them. And now in the European Union, they are proposing a new law that the police can scan every chat and every picture and every data on your smartphone under the pretext of protecting child abuse and child pornography and etc. So I think these Western governments are already headed toward more tyrannical approaches against their people.
And also something else to think about is China has a huge amount of surveillance. Like, I mean, massive amounts. When I was in Xinjiang, I've never seen that much surveillance. Right, never. There were checkpoints everywhere. I mean, I went to Kashgar, Aksu, Urumqi, a bunch of cities in Xinjiang, and everywhere we went, there were checkpoints. And I'm not joking. We're talking machine guns. All the windows of the car must be rolled down, sunglasses off, cap off. There are cameras looking into the car, and you need to look outwards as you drive through the checkpoint and all that kind of stuff. And this was everywhere in Xinjiang. And of course, between all of that, it's great, it's wonderful. But there is this sort of dark underbelly, and it didn't make me comfortable at all. But I do understand it. I've done a little bit of homework, and the average person doesn't really know why, there's so much surveillance in Xinjiang, for example. But when you understand the geopolitical nature of that region, it does start making more sense. And there is a practical aspect to it. The Chinese government, for all its warts, has done an incredible job of maintaining and preserving sovereignty. Now, this is something that we've been talking about for years now. We talk about countries trying to get sovereignty again and get rid of infiltration. Well, the Chinese government has done a great job of doing this. It comes at a cost, sure. I mean, if you want to be Joe Rogan or Charlie Kirk or Alex Jones, you're not going to get that right in China, right? That's not the country for you, because the Chinese government won't allow any kind of what they would deem to be radicalism. They don't. They will clip your wings very quickly. You stay out of the realm of political discourse, and you're fine. And you can be a billionaire and all that sort of thing. But stay out of the realm of political discourse because they don't want uprisings. They don't like protests. And if I'm a political cartoonist, China is not a country where I would survive as a political cartoonist. But
so it's the government leading the change in the country and not allowing individuals to influence the course of the change in the country.
But what's interesting about it, and this is an anecdote, I might have this wrong, but what's interesting about this is the Chinese people like their government. And they like their government because the government drove the change. The last 30 years, China has changed, as we all know, remarkably, like in ways that the whole world is marveling over, right?
Yes.
Shanghai in the 80s was mostly rural, and there was a lot of crime. And I was talking to people who grew up in the 80s in China, and they're saying, we had food rations. and we struggled with our health, and we struggled with crime. We were hungry all the time because we couldn't eat. Now, Shanghai, the same city, is full of abundance and prosperity. And so the people, you got to understand, the people look at this and they say, well, why would I dislike my government when it's the government that drove the turnaround? Compare that to my country, South Africa. In the same time period, in the last 30 years, we went from apartheid to supposedly freedom. My country's gone backwards. We have super high crime, Kevork, super high crime. We have like 50 murders or 38 murders per day and 50 rapes per day in South Africa. And we have huge crime syndicates and gangs and all kinds of stuff. So choose your battles. Do you want to concede the ability to criticize the government but have the safety and all that they have in China? That's up to you to decide. My default setting is still what I have here in South Africa, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a very high cost. So you have to decide which battles you want to choose to fight. But I mean, like for example, I didn't like the fact that I had to go through military checks, but I did like the efficiency. They were not slow. Everything was quick and fast. Trains are they travel at ridiculous speeds. Everything is functional. Everything is fast. Everything works. People culturally are very decent in China.
Yes.
They're very caring.
This is something one of the commentators was saying. He says the key difference between China and most of the West is that China or the Chinese people are civilized. In a civilized society, even a totalitarian government will work for the greater good, which is
exactly
what we are
right.
seeing.
Yes, and this is difficult to explain, and this is why I would encourage you and everybody else to go to China and spend a few days there. Even if I've got this wrong, even if I have this wrong, it certainly feels as though the Chinese government cares about the future of China. If you come here to South Africa, it's very obvious that the South African government doesn't care about the people. Right? It's very obvious. But when you're in China, it does feel as though the government cares about China and the people. And as a result, it has a very civilized society, a very decent society. Do I want to live there? No. But
why do you think that you would not be able to live there? Because when I was reading your article, I went to China to see what the truth is. You describe China as surprisingly clean, efficient, and orderly. So what could, let's say, hold you back from moving or working in China?
Oh, well, that's easy. It's not my home. Home is where the heart is, and my heart is here on the African continent with all its warts and broken infrastructure. And because remember, there is a sense of freedom when you have chaos.
That's also true.
And it's very difficult to describe also unless you've been to sub-Saharan Africa. There is a beauty, Kevork, and I know you've wanted to visit also. There is a magic about China, but there's also a magic about the African continent. And
yes,
and I like nature, and I like I like to be able to understand people. I cannot get past the language barrier. This is something that will just frustrate me. When I was in China, I was going around with Apple, the Apple Translate app or Google Translate or whatever.
Yeah,
now, I don't really use Google apps for anything, but the Google Translate app became very, very useful very quickly in China. And I don't really like Chinese food that much, so I do prefer my own sort of cultural, my own cultural attributes and characteristics and all those things that make me what I am. In China, I will be a foreigner. But I would love, just on a human level, some of those characteristics to be exported. Kevork, when you eat almost anywhere in China, the food gets brought to the middle of the table,
Hmm.
not to you, but to the middle of the table, and everybody shares. They take from the middle of the table. In China, in many aspects of society, you write your surname first.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because it's your family name, and family comes first. They've got some beautiful, beautiful elements of what it means to put family number one, to put community number two, kind of thing. But there is also a kind of dark underbelly. There is a type of fear of the state, and I think that's been, result of successful, Chinese state propaganda over the decades. They don't talk about the government at all, good or bad. They just, it's as though they don't acknowledge that the government even exists. But there is also a weird sense of freedom, and this is why China is such a philosophical tug of war, because you can go to Europe and you can see the implosion. You can see the catastrophe that's occurring. Whether it's takfirism that's occurring via intel operations that's there to destroy European culture. When I was in Holland, the churches were empty, and remember, Europe is the heart of Christianity, and I would love to see full churches in the heart of Christianity. And you see this very, very blatant collapse that's occurring across Western countries. And then you don't see that happening in China. You see this magnificent growth across all sectors. And that's where the tug of war occurs, because you go, everything I thought I knew, I'm now I'm re-questioning, because they've turned it around. They've done something. They've actually made it positive. And
what have they done correctly? This is the serious question, Like, I live in Germany, and I'm not German, but I can see with my objective eye the decline in the infrastructure, in how the streets went from safe into unsafe, how the train stations became a place for alcoholics, became a place for drug addicts, became a place for people who are homeless. Crime everywhere. Like, every day we hear about rapes, knife attacks, unsafety, right? And also the economic decline in Germany. What have they done correctly in China that the European governments, like, doing the opposite, or decided to do to just turn around and go to the opposite direction?
I don't know. This is one of the questions. Look, I suppose if you're very honest with yourself, you'll know that it started with Mao, and you'll know that it will all go back to the sort of the Cultural Revolution and the giant leap forward, etc., great leap forward, and it comes with a very polarized set of commentaries. My friend Carl, who I traveled with, he is Chinese, but he lives in Bali. Carl Zar, I think you might know him, and he grew up, in the 80s with food rations, and his parents grew up under Mao, and they didn't like Mao at all. But then you see Mao statues across China, and you realize that there is a very divided opinion on him. But whether or not you like Mao, it can't be denied that what he started led to a lot of pain, led to a huge amount of hardship, and then suddenly the acceleration, because they changed, through revolution, dramatically, the future of that country. Now, let me give an example. South Africa went from apartheid to quote unquote democracy. All right. But there was no revolution. And I'm not a fan of revolution, right? But I'm just saying, there was no revolution. All that happened was the previous government simply changed to another government. In other words, people got up from their seats and new people sat down in those seats. What the Chinese government did was they dramatically changed everything. Like they completely overhauled the entire system.
Yes.
Whereas in my country, the system wasn't overhauled. They just replaced a group of people with another group of people. That's all they did.
Like it happened in Syria.
Yes. And of course, the current setup in South Africa is heavily infiltrated by Western interests. And the Chinese government made very certain that it would kick out George Soros, in the late 1980s, and it would remove Zionist control in the banking sector. There's no evidence of Zionist control in China. In actual fact, Judaism is not even recognized in China. I don't know if you know that. So
the other day, they also banned a Christian domination in China, where the priest basically was spreading or preaching the Christian Zionism or evangelical.
Yeah. Now, so religion in China is also very interesting because there's a lot of propaganda around that too. And this is something that I also tried to look into while I was there. So as far as I understand, China's got 5 state-sanctioned religions. In other words, 5 religions that are approved by the state. And 2 of them, I think, are it's Protestant Christianity and Catholicism, Islam, Buddhism, I think, and then there was one other, Shintoism or something like that. Right, okay. Judaism's not recognized and everything else is not recognized. What does it mean if it's recognized? It means that if you're going to practice one of those religions, you have to get approval by the state. On the face of it, doesn't sound very good at all, because it means that your wings are going to be clipped if part of what you believe is deemed to be radical. But you can also understand it if you're taking the position of preserving sovereignty of the country's borders. Billy Graham or some famous church preacher, mega church priest or whatever, church pastor or whatever, is not going to really be allowed to happen. He's not really going to occur because they'll quickly stop that, because that to the state is radical, and they don't want radicalism. So they'll try and keep everything somewhat subdued, and that's why you end up with sort of underground churches, because they feel that they can't practice fully. But again, you have to understand context. China is not a Christian country. China is not a Muslim country. It is an atheist government. And so therefore, whether you think it's a good or bad thing doesn't really matter. The point is that that's what it is. And so therefore, it wants to preserve the sovereignty of the state first and foremost. And it will not allow, and this is the thing, when you talk to Chinese people, they say, who are you to comment about our system? Look at yours. Look at America. They don't dislike Americans, but they certainly don't have much respect for Americans. They don't see Americans as particularly, forward-thinking people. They laugh at the American system. From having a Hollywood, TV show host as the president to only thinking in 4-year blocks or whatever. Whereas China doesn't have a voting system, so they can think 1,000 years ahead. And that's what they do. They think in long games. Whereas America can't do more than, what happens after Trump? Right? He can't get another term. So now somebody's going to come in, possibly a Democrat, and overturn a whole bunch of stuff that he did. And so that it just shows you that the democratic system doesn't really work. And the Chinese system, whether you like it or not, does seem to work. Now, and this is very important, I don't know, and I spoke to people there, and they are very worried about where China is going to be in the next 15 to 20 years. When I was in Shanghai, I saw almost no pregnant women, very few kids, very few toddlers. That I think is a consequence of the one-child policy that only ended around 2015 or something. And now you're sitting with an aging population. What is going to happen in the next generation? And
do they have a plan for it? Like, are they going to import? Because I heard that they have opened immigration.
Yes, and this is now a mirror image of what's going on in Europe, and it doesn't work. You can't You can't solve your economic problems by importing people who are not homogenous. You end up with too much conflict. The obvious answer is to have more kids. That is it. That's it right there. You need to have more kids. And so I believe that the Chinese government is now offering incentives for larger families, because they are worried about the collapse of their own economic growth. I think they're down to like 5% now, 5% growth. They were doing, I think, like 8% a few years ago. Most of the world, I don't even think is anywhere near 5%. I think South Africa is like less than 1%. I think America is also very, very low. And most European countries are probably even lower than like, 3% or something. But so 5% is still pretty good, so to speak. But that's not going to go up. That's going to go down.
What was the reason behind the one-child policy, and what has changed now?
So it depends on. I did a great conversation. I recorded a fantastic conversation, which included this topic. The one-child policy is always attributed to Mao, but that's incorrect, because he actually stated multiple times that he loved big families and he wasn't worried about the population growth of China. It was, depending on which side of history you want to align with, there's a very convincing argument to be made that it had to do with American foreign policy that got involved. And we know that Kissinger and others visited China in the late 60s, early 70s. And we also know that threats were given to the Chinese government, because at that stage, there were signs of growth in China. And the population, well, I think then was like 800, 900 million already. And there is a very interesting discussion behind the scenes about what actually happened with the US visits to China, because almost immediately after those visits, the Chinese, the one-child policy was implemented. And we do know that the Chinese government, even to this day, doesn't like creating unnecessary conflict, particularly with the United States. So it could be the case that there was a game of chess that was played and it wasn't in the Chinese favor, because remember, they were very poor still at that stage, and they couldn't really play the best game. But I think now, if whoever the equivalent to Kissinger would be had to visit China, I think the Chinese government would be a lot more aggressive in its counter response, because it can now. It has the cards it can play. So I tend to think it was Western policy that influenced the introduction of the one-child policy, because it doesn't make that much sense that the Chinese government would suddenly want to kill its own people. But the argument that supports that is that they were worried that if the population grew too big too quickly, then they would never recover from being a poor sort of farming country. So I don't know. You must decide which part of history you want to find to be more convincing.
Jerm, if you're a Western politician, if you're European, if you're an American, should you be worried about the success story in China? A story that the Chinese have established apparently an economic and political system which challenges the Western liberal model and offers an alternative, basically, not only for China, but also a model probably for Africa, for the Middle East, and other what they call the third world countries. And should they be worried that if China becomes a second pole or grows too much, that this democratic system would no longer thrive or survive if China can project its hegemonic status, let's say, on the rest of the world? This is something that I receive daily by people, especially who are on the right, or conservatives, Republicans, also the populists in Europe. They always say, be careful of China, because once they become too big, they're not going only to export roads and bridges. No, they will also export the political system, and then the entire world, the authoritarianism will be normalized.
I don't see any evidence of that. I used to think that. The silent enemy is this quiet colonialism that we keep hearing about that China's doing. But the Chinese government has said multiple times over the years that it has no interest in exporting its system to anywhere else in the world. There's almost no Chinese military anywhere outside of China. I think it's like one base,
On Djibouti.
one military base. Yeah. You got like 800 American bases, most of which are surrounding China and Russia. I mean, this is projection if there ever was. And then they say, yes, but, China is buying up the world by building infrastructure everywhere, and so you end up with debt traps. Well, I would rather, if I were to choose the lesser of the evils here, I would rather have a Chinese debt trap than an IMF or NATO debt trap. Let me tell you why. Because when Putin wanted to come to South Africa, I think in 2023, Victoria Nuland very quickly flew to South Africa and threw threats at us, saying that if Putin lands on our shores, we will face American sanctions. And what did we do? We told Putin not to come. Why? Because we are beholden to the US still at the moment, very unfortunately. Now, China doesn't do that, right? It doesn't ever do that. What does it do? Well, it quietly builds up everything. So you have, I don't know when last you flew Ethiopian Airlines, but they got one of the most successful airlines now across Africa. A super poor country with this phenomenal airline growth. I flew Ethiopian now when I went to China and back. So you land in Addis Ababa, and it's this massive airport that kind of in some ways mimics the Dubai airport. It was built by the Chinese. So I would rather have, high-speed trains and airports and, tech and have to pay back that than to pay back, I don't know, bombing, drone attacks. What exactly does the United States ever offer other than aggression?
Yes.
And I don't hate the US at all. Please understand me. But the World Bank, the IMF, all they do is create literal financial debt traps, whereas at least you're getting something for the debt that the Chinese are doing. They're building stuff. They're building high speed rails. I think in Kenya, the Chinese built the first high speed rail in Kenya. Now, where does the US do any of that? Does it go into any country with the aim of building? No, as far as I can tell, they just have a military presence everywhere and attack everything.
It's a different model, definitely a different model. And I'm being very honest with you. Till the moment, I didn't also see evidence of Chinese even having the intention of becoming a superpower in the sense that people think they're aspiring to become an empire. What they're doing basically is normalizing a new type of governance and an economic model that works for them. And they're testing it in Africa and in other places, and it also works in these countries. It's a win-win formula. The Chinese will win more, definitely, but the people will win as well. We're talking about local populations, and I think uplifting African people and the African continent in terms of its economy, it also serves the European interest. Now that the Africans will stay in their homes, they will not aspire to move to Europe for economic opportunities. If you have opportunities in Africa, why would you move to Europe, right? You call it home because Africa is home for millions and millions of people. I think the Chinese fingerprint is definitely net positive up until the moment, as someone also who despises the way the US imposes its will on the rest of the world. And only recently we have seen how they have mass murdered Palestinians for the sake of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians, rebuilding it as they're aspiring, like planning on a Rivera, a Los Angeles, or LA in Gaza, on what? On the corpses of tens of thousands of children, right? So definitely there is a different approach between China and the United States. Some people would say, yeah, but the Chinese are playing the long game. They are patient for now, but once they reach to that absolute hegemonic status, then they will show us their true face. I think this is a projection. This is the way that the American planners are, let's say, behaving. That's why this projection is always on other countries as well. But if I want to ask you this, you spent 1 month there. Do you think the West or the Western elites, as they call them, could actually learn from China in terms of governance, infrastructure, or even social cohesion without necessarily adopting its entire political system? Is it possible?
Yes, obviously it's possible, but they don't want to. The globalist elites, the Western elites, want power first and foremost. I think we can all agree on that. They don't actually want cohesion. They don't want to have multipolarity. I mean, Trump was already saying in 2012, that he wants to stop China, and there are commentators who I like who say that Trump believes in multipolarity. I don't see the evidence of that. I don't see evidence of any of the sort of NATO, the NATO sort of bloc being okay with the rise of Russia and China and basically the global South. Now, I don't think BRICS is the savior, and I think it's a bit of a it's a fallacy to think that BRICS is somehow going to save the world. No, I think BRICS it's got its own problems, but I think that what China is doing has worked for China, and I think this is important because I think Alexander Dugin makes this point in the Fourth Political Theory. Different parts of the world operate differently, and we must come to terms with the fact that the world's a big place and not everything can run the same way. True democracy can probably work in some regions of the world. I don't think it can work in Africa. I don't think it can work. Actually, I don't think it can work generally. But okay, let's assume that it can in some instances. Let's pretend that China is communist. Now, in my view, it's not, but let's pretend it is for the sake of discussion. Well, it works for China. And that was what Alexander Dugin was saying, that we must accept that there are different groups of people have different cultural characteristics and attributes that work best with different types of setups.
True.
And I think that is something that Westerners don't get. They want to apply their way onto everybody and to everything. We're going to bring you democracy. We're going to bring you freedom. Well, the Chinese don't want it. They don't want it. They want what they've got very, very clearly and are happy with it and are proud of it. And they are very conservative, by the way. It's a very conservative country. They've got tight border control. They're very homogenous. Nothing is overtly liberalized in China other than perhaps the markets. But that's more abstract. But I mean, you don't see girls walking around with ultra low tops. The culture feels quite conservative, and I think that there is a lot. Never mind the elites, Kevork. I think there's a lot that the world can learn from Chinese, both good and bad. By the way, I mean there are things that you don't want to. For example, I don't like the relationship the Chinese have with animals. There's just something I can't pin it. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't make me comfortable. When you go to the night markets or the wet markets or whatever, which I went to many.
Was this a culture shock for you?
Yeah.
Or you expected it?
Yeah, no, I kind of expected it, but it's never. It's if you're not used to it, you
can't swallow it.
I couldn't eat half the food. I just can't. And the funny thing is, someone in China said to me, "Yes, but you hunt, right?" I said, "Yes, I hunt." And they said, "Well, what's the difference?" And I can't answer this. I don't know how to answer it. I just find that their relationship with animals is not something I'm compatible with.
Me too.
And I don't know. I can't pin it. I don't know how to put that into words.
We can't we cannot process that. I think this is how I wanted to end up with this conversation, to ask you, what's the cultural shock that you had? Let's take it as a cultural shock. What's the one thing that you liked the most in China, felt very comfortable with, and what's the one thing that you wish that you change in China?
I love how proud Chinese people are of their own culture. They love their culture. They love their history. They're not ashamed of it. Talk to people in the UK, and they hate everything to do with Britain. They just have no sense of pride. And I love how proud, just naturally, organically proud Chinese people are of their history, warts and all, and their culture and their heritage. And they don't care if you think they're racist or whatever. They don't care. And they do profile people. I mean, when I got off the airplane in Shanghai, there was a group of black guys from Congo who were asked to disembark first. and when I was inside the airport, I stood next to one of those guys, because you have to fill in these arrival cards, and his card had a stamp on it, official stamp on it, that said profiled. Now that's the Chinese way, and you might go, well, I don't like that. Okay, fine, then don't go there. But I love how proud they are of who they are, of their identity. They are not ashamed of their identity. Now, what I don't like is the overt nature of surveillance and sort of centrally, technologically controlled, daily life is. I don't like that. I don't like everything being so technologically advanced. It makes me uncomfortable, and I think it also makes you way too reliant on sort of the technocratic nature of the system, because if it fails, then it has very big repercussions.
Very true.
So I think we can learn from them in the sense that they are, culturally proud. They love, their families and communities, and I love that they're not hyper individualistic. I love that. I think it's a major issue in the West, and I'm not by any means, pro-communist or socialist or anything like that. I don't like these labels. I'm just telling you what I like from my own experience. And then the things that I don't like the sort of hyper centralization of tech, and I don't like that everything has to operate from your cell phone, and I don't like that that the state itself has so much power, but that in itself is part of the ongoing discussion, I suppose, about China.
Yeah. And you depend on the goodwill of the government when everything becomes centralized in the hands of the government. But up until this moment, we see that there is a different type of relationship between the Chinese people with their government compared to the Western people with their governments, and what these governments are also aspiring when it comes to surveillance control, and also exporting mayhem to other regions in the world. Jerm, my friend, thank you very much for sharing your first-hand experiences and your insights tonight. What you have described, I think, challenges the oversimplified narratives we so often hear about China, and reminds us that the world cannot be understood through propaganda, whether it is Western or Eastern. And ladies and gentlemen, please go ahead, Jerm, if you want to say something.
No. I was just going to say thank you very much for having me. It's been a great pleasure. And you said exactly what I wanted to say, that we need to approach these things with nuance.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's why I wanted to have you. I texted you when you were in China, and I waited you patiently to come back so we could have this brilliant conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Syriana Analysis. I'm Kevork Almassian, and I want to thank you for watching this stream, whether you joined us on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Ganjin World. If you found this conversation informative, please take a moment to like this stream, share it with your friends, and consider supporting my independent work on Patreon so we can continue bringing you fact-based analytical coverage of global affairs. Until next time, stay informed, stay rational, and see the world as it is, not as they tell you it is. Peace. Peace, Jerm.